In the vast sweep of human history, few powers have cast a shadow as long and wide as the British Empire. At its zenith, it was a dominion of staggering proportions, the largest empire the world had ever seen, commanding a quarter of the Earth's land and a fifth of its population. This was the empire on which the sun never set. A colossal entity stretching from the snows of Canada to the sun-scorched plains of Australia, from the bustling heart of India to the farthest reaches of Africa. Its story began with daring voyages across uncharted seas, fueled by a thirst for discovery and commerce. English mariners, traders, and adventurers planted their flag on distant shores, establishing colonies that would grow into powerful outposts. Over centuries, through conquest, negotiation, and settlement, a global network of territories was forged, bound together by the might of the Royal Navy and the intricate threads of trade. London, a foggy, rain-swept city on a small island, became the very center of the world, a global hub of finance, politics, and power. From its grand parliamentary halls and bustling dockyards, Britain governed a tapestry of diverse cultures, peoples, and lands. The engine of this empire was the Industrial Revolution. Britain's mastery of steam power, its sprawling factories, and its revolutionary technologies gave it an unparalleled economic and military edge. British-made goods flooded global markets, while the empire's vast territories supplied the raw materials needed to feed its insatiable industrial machine. Cotton from India, rubber from Malaya, diamonds from Africa, the wealth of nations flowed towards the imperial core. This was an empire built not just on military might, but on a revolutionary economic system that reshaped the globe. An intricate web of railways, telegraph cables, and shipping lanes connected the empire, making it a truly globalized power. The red-coated soldier became a symbol of British authority, enforcing order and protecting imperial interests from the Caribbean to the Pacific. From India to Africa, from Canada to Australia, Britain ruled across continents, claiming lands, resources, and influence. It was an empire built on trade, technology, and control. But even as the empire reached its dazzling peak in the late 19th century, cracks were beginning to appear beneath the gilded surface. The very forces that had built the empire, industrialization and global connection, also sowed the seeds of its eventual decline. Inside Britain, the dark side of industrial progress was becoming undeniable. The immense wealth generated by factories and trade often came at the cost of its own people. Cities swelled, choked with smoke, and millions toiled in grueling conditions for meager wages. Social unrest simmered, and the calls for reform grew louder. Strikes and protests became a common feature of urban life, challenging the established order. Far across the seas, a different kind of challenge was brewing. The idea of self-determination, born from the very Enlightenment principles that Britain itself championed, was taking root in its colonies. Educated local elites, often trained in British universities, began to question the legitimacy of foreign rule. They saw the hypocrisy in an empire that spoke of liberty while denying it to millions of its subjects. From the bustling streets of Calcutta to the villages of West Africa, movements for independence began to stir. These early nationalist whispers grew into powerful voices, demanding freedom and the right to chart their own destiny. Britain struggled to maintain control over its far-flung territories. An empire stretched thin. Is an empire vulnerable? The cost of policing a global dominion was immense, and the political will to maintain it by force began to waver. Then came the cataclysm of the 20th century. First World War, a brutal, devastating conflict, drew in soldiers from every corner of the empire. Men from Canada, Australia, India, and Africa fought and died in the muddy trenches of Europe. While the war was won, the cost was staggering. Britain emerged victorious but deeply wounded, its economy shattered and its treasury drained. A generation of its finest young men was lost. The war had exposed the empire's vulnerabilities and accelerated the demands for self-governance from the colonies that had sacrificed so much for the imperial cause. Less than a generation later, the world was plunged into darkness once more. The Second World War was a fight for Britain's very survival. The Blitz brought the horror of war directly to its cities, as London and other industrial centers burned under relentless bombing. Once again, the empire rallied. But the effort to defeat the Axis powers was even more costly than the First Great War. By 1945, Britain was victorious, but exhausted and bankrupt. It had lost its position as the world's dominant superpower, a role now assumed by the United States and the Soviet Union. With millions dead and the economy shattered, Britain could no longer afford to support its global empire. Meanwhile, the war had fanned the flames of nationalism across Asia and Africa. The fight against tyranny in Europe made the continuation of colonial rule seem utterly indefensible. Nationalist movements, inspired and emboldened, ignited like wildfire. The first and most decisive blow to the empire's integrity came from its most prized possession, India. For decades, the Indian independence movement, under the visionary leadership of figures like Mahatma Gandhi, had challenged British rule through a powerful campaign of nonviolent resistance. India, the jewel of the empire, led the way. Millions of Indians joined protests, marches, and acts of civil disobedience, making the subcontinent increasingly ungovernable. After the immense strain of World War II, a war-weary Britain finally conceded. In 1947, the British flag was lowered over Delhi for the last time. But independence came at a terrible price. The hurried and poorly managed partition of the subcontinent into India and Pakistan unleashed a wave of horrific communal violence, displacing millions and costing countless lives. Despite the chaos and tragedy, the message was clear. After decades of resistance, Britain conceded independence. The world watched as the empire's brightest crown slipped from its grasp. The loss of India was a mortal wound. It signaled the end of an era. Without India, its vast resources, and its symbolic importance, the empire's foundations crumbled. The tide of decolonization, now unstoppable, swept across the globe. Inspired by India's success, one colony after another demanded and won its freedom. The winds of change, as British Prime Minister Harold Macmillan famously called them, blew fiercely through Africa in the 1950s and 60s. Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, and dozens of other nations reclaimed their sovereignty. In the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and the Caribbean, the story was the same. The Union Jack was lowered in capitals across the world, replaced by the vibrant colors of new national flags. Some transitions were peaceful, negotiated handovers of power. Others were marked by bitter and violent struggles. But the outcome was never in doubt. The age of empire was over. The formal end is often marked by the handover of Hong Kong to China in 1997, the last major colonial territory to be relinquished. The empire on which the sun never set had finally seen its twilight. Today, its legacy is complex and fiercely debated, a story of technological progress and economic exploitation, of shared institutions and deep-seated injustices. The colossal structure that once dominated the globe has vanished, leaving behind a profoundly changed world and a collection of independent nations forever shaped by their imperial past. What remains is the Commonwealth, a voluntary association of former colonies, and the indelible, often controversial mark left on the cultures, borders, and politics of the modern world. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe for more journeys into history. The 1950s and 60s marked a tidal wave of change across the globe. From the bustling streets of Accra to the crowded squares of Cairo, a powerful cry for freedom echoed. Kenya, Nigeria, Ghana, Egypt, Sudan, Cyprus, one by one, nations broke free from the chains of colonial rule. The dominoes of empire, which had stood for centuries, began to topple with astonishing speed. Some transitions were peaceful, marked by handshakes and symbolic ceremonies as power was handed over. Others, however, erupted into violence and revolution, as the struggle for sovereignty became a fight for survival. But regardless of the path taken, the message was clear and undeniable. The age of empire was ending. A new era of self-determination was dawning. In 1956, Britain made one last, desperate gamble to reclaim its waning influence on the world stage. Alongside France and Israel, it invaded Egypt during the Suez Crisis, attempting to seize control of the vital Suez Canal after its nationalization by President Nasser. For a moment, it seemed like the old imperial playbook might still work. But the world had changed. The United States and the Soviet Union, the two new global superpowers, applied immense diplomatic and economic pressure. Humiliated, Britain withdrew. It was a watershed moment, the point of no return. The world now understood a stark new reality. Britain was no longer a superpower, capable of imposing its will upon others. The illusion of imperial might had been shattered forever. As independence movements swept the world, Britain was forced to reinvent its global role. The rigid structure of empire gave way to a new, more flexible concept: partnership. The Commonwealth of Nations was born, a voluntary association of sovereign states, most of which were former British territories. It was an unprecedented transformation. Instead of clinging to power until the bitter end, Britain facilitated a largely peaceful transition, turning a collapsing empire into a modern network of equals, bound by shared history, language, and values. This shift from coercion to cooperation marked the final chapter in the story of direct British rule. But it also opened a new one, based on diplomacy and mutual respect. The symbolic end, the final, poignant farewell to centuries of imperial dominion, came on a rainy night in 1997. The world watched as the vibrant, glittering skyline of Hong Kong provided the backdrop for a historic ceremony. This thriving territory, the last major jewel in the imperial crown, was handed over to China. As the Union Jack was slowly lowered for the last time, and the flag of China was raised in its place, the moment was heavy with emotion. For some, it was a moment of pride and liberation. For others, a moment of profound sadness and uncertainty. But for everyone, it was the definitive full stop. When the flag came down, an age officially and irrevocably ended. The British Empire may be gone, its flags lowered and its armies withdrawn, but its influence remains etched into the very fabric of the modern world. It's in the language we speak. English is the global language of business, science, and the internet. It's in the laws that govern us. Common law systems shape justice in nations across continents. It's in the trade routes that connect us, the railways that cross vast landscapes, and the parliamentary buildings where democracies flourish. From the bustling streets of Mumbai to the halls of government in Ottawa, remnants of an empire that once spanned the world are everywhere. Empires fall. History moves on. But legacies remain, shaping the world long after the rulers are gone. Thank you for watching this cinematic documentary. If you want to explore more incredible stories of empires, wars, and the rise and fall of civilizations, be sure to subscribe to Aurem Tales. We have many more journeys into the past waiting for you.